All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on a condition that honestly often works completely behind the scenes. It creates this silent ripple effect all through the body. We are talking about hyperlipidemia.
But let's start with a bit of a puzzle. What do the heart, the liver, and the kidneys really have in common? I mean, they seem like totally different systems, right? Well, as we're about to see, they can all be knocked off balance by the very same starting point.
So to answer that question and really see the connection, we have to get a solid handle on that starting point for all these issues, which is, of course, hyperlipidemia. So, what is this thing? At its core, it's actually pretty straightforward. Hyperlipidemia just means you've got abnormally high levels of lipids, fats like cholesterol, floating around in your blood. You might also hear it called dyslipidemia, which is a related term.
But here is the thing, and this is absolutely crucial. This is so much more than just a number you see on a lab report. That number, it's a signal. It's an early warning for a process that can have some pretty far-reaching consequences.
And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, the body's chain reaction. The best way to think about it is like a stone tossed into a pond. Those high lipids in your blood, that's the stone. And it creates these ripples that spread out, touching all these different parts of your body in really significant ways. So let's follow those ripples.
Okay, so the first ripple, it often hits the liver. We see this really strong link between hyperlipidemia and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. And it just makes sense when you stop and think about it, right? If there's too much fat in the blood, the liver, which is the body's main filter, it can just get overwhelmed and start storing all that extra fat.
The next ripple spreads out and reaches the kidneys. Turns out, dyslipidemia is a well-known feature of something called nephrotic syndrome, which is a really serious kidney disorder. So there it is, a direct line connecting what's happening in the bloodstream to the health of these vital organs.
And that brings us to the biggest and frankly the most dangerous ripple of all, the impact on the heart. Hyperlipidemia is a major risk factor for myocardial infarction, in other words, a heart attack. All those high levels of fat can start to build up in the arteries, and that leads to blockages. It's no surprise, then, that we see it so often in people who are also dealing with high blood pressure and heart failure. It's all connected.
So we've seen the downstream effects, but what does this actually look like when it first pops up, from a clinical perspective? Let's take a look at the actual numbers.
This is where we can make it real with a specific example. Let's say you have a patient who's just been diagnosed with diabetes. Their lab work might come back showing a total cholesterol of 220 milligrams per deciliter and an LDL, that's the bad cholesterol, of 160. Both of those numbers are flagged as elevated, and they're a clear clinical signal that hyperlipidemia is in play.
Okay, so understanding the problem, that's step one. But the next obvious question is, what can we actually do about it? Well, the good news is there's a pretty well-established playbook for taking back control.
The number one tool in that playbook is a class of drugs called statins. You've probably heard of some of them, like atorvastatin or rosuvastatin. And notice a pattern here? They're often prescribed right alongside treatments for other related stuff, like high blood pressure. It just goes to show you again how interconnected all of this is.
And here's where it gets really interesting. These medications do way more than just lower a number on a lab test. Atorvastatin, for example, is known to have actual survival benefits because it helps prevent something called platelet aggregation. Now, in simple terms, that just means it makes your blood less sticky, and that reduces the risk of the very clots that can lead to a heart attack. Pretty amazing, right? So, what this all boils down to is this. Managing hyperlipidemia is not some isolated task you check off a list. It's a core, fundamental part of a much, much bigger strategy to protect your entire cardiovascular system, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, and that whole network of vessels that connects everything.
Which kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. When you understand this whole web of connections, this incredible ripple effect we've been talking about, how does that change the way you look at a single number on a blood test? It's not just data anymore, is it? It's a clue. It's a signpost pointing to the health of your entire system.